We are going through a series in 1st and 2nd Peter. We're up to the 2nd chapter. Seth covered chapter 1 last week. I'm going to have most of the verses up here on the screen, but I'm going to have to skip over several. So if you want to follow along in your Bibles, you'll have the whole story right there. 1 Peter chapter 2. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about this guy. He looks like a patient, doesn't he? I know it's an old picture. This was taken in 1961. That makes it a pretty old picture, right? 1961. In fact, this happened in April 30th of 1961. This guy who looks like a patient is actually a surgeon. His name's Leonard Rogozov. He's a Russian man, and he was part of a team that was sent to Antarctica. As I understand this, some of the information I've looked up about this, there were 12 different people that they dropped off in Antarctica. And when you're in Antarctica, especially certain times of the year, it's not like you can go to the hardware store and pick up supplies, right? And so you need medical personnel, you need mechanics, you need all sorts of people, even if you're doing some scientific investigations. You need the support group. So they sent along a surgeon, Rogozov, because if there's a medical emergency, no plane's going to get in, no boat's going to be able to come in because of the weather certain times of the year. Well, they did have a medical emergency. The problem was it was him. And he knew that if somebody didn't take his appendix out soon, it would rupture and he'd be dead. So what he did is two of the other guys on the team, there was a mechanic and a meteorologist. And the meteorologist, he saw a lot of potential in, so he trained him to do a few things in just a few minutes. The mechanic, he said, all you have to do is keep me awake and hold a mirror so that I can see what I'm going to do. And under a local, he pulled out his own appendix. There's only 2 times, there's probably happened a few times, but only 2 times that I'm aware of that procedure's been done on somebody, they did it to themselves. And this is one of those times when that happened. And as soon as I heard that, one of the first things that came to my mind is, you know what? Extraordinary circumstances sometimes call for extraordinary solutions, right? It's called a measured response. You know, sometimes you can work your way back. You look at the solution that's involved in answering a problem, you better understand just how big the problem was in the first place, right? A lot of times when things are out of the ordinary, it's going to take something special to solve that problem or to answer that need. Now, why in the world am I bringing this up? Because we're going to be getting into a topic today, and I want to make sure that we understand the backdrop. Because the backdrop, even though we don't maybe want to think about it or we don't like to think about it, the problem is big. And I do want you to think about this with me for just a few minutes, and you can put it out of your mind after that, but for just a few minutes, would you just think with me about the kind of world that we live in? It's a bad place. I'm telling you, you don't have to watch much of the news to realize that there's dictators, different parts of the world, there's different groups that are carrying out different, people being raped and murdered. There's all sorts of, and a lot of times it's not just the warring people, sometimes there's innocent bystanders, that their body count is nauseating. The world in which we live in is a dark place, and there's a lot of evil taking place on a daily basis, but you don't have to listen to the world news to get that picture. You can cut out everything that happens outside of Florida and just think about Orlando and the Central Florida area, and you're still going to be depressed if you listen to much of what happens on a daily basis. So let's bring the circle in a little bit closer, and let's just think about the local community, and let's just think about people we know. If your eyes are open and you're not just purposefully eliminating the bad stuff, you're going to see bad stuff on a daily basis. I'm sorry to bring this up, and I don't want to ignore the fact there are a lot of good people doing a lot of good things. But you know, one of the reasons that those good people doing good things stand out so much is because it's such a dark backdrop. There is awful stuff happening all the time. I read an article, in fact, this is the second article I've read in 10 days by 2 different authors talking about family estrangement. What I mean by family estrangement, sociologists who track this stuff say we are at an all-time high for family estrangement. And they define this by adult children cutting off all relationship with their parents. 38% in our culture. You know what? That's current, right? But if you were to ask people sometime in your life, has there been some sort of family estrangement where one family member, maybe a brother or a sister, parent, child, whatever, they've just cut off all relationship with somebody else, I'm betting you, and by the way, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to ask you to do this, but I'm betting you if I were to ask you to raise your hands, if that's been the case in your family, I'm betting over half the people in this room would be raising their hand. Why? Because that sort of stuff happens all the time. It's not just other families, it happens to our families, right? And in fact, if you want to draw the circles really narrow, all you have to do is look at your own life and the thoughts you think and what goes on the inside, and you would realize, you know what, this is a pretty dark place. There's some stuff that happens in here I wish never had happened, but it's happened. Now, why in the world am I bringing this up? Because the problem is so great, I want us to consider God's answer to the problem. It's a measured response. And what we're going to find out, I mean, if you look at the world in general first, right? Romans, the 8th chapter, when it talks about this creation that God has made. When God created the world, remember how it's described in the book of Genesis? When God made day 1, day 2, day 3. When God made, it was good. Behold, it was good. It was good. At the end of creation, when God looked at everything He created, behold, it is very good. Is it very good right now? No. Romans chapter 8, it says creation itself groans. Why? Because things are not the way they're supposed to be. I don't know if you think about this very often, and I didn't mean to go here because it's kind of off subject, but do you realize that this world, this globe upon which we live, it is groaning under the strain, under the effect that sin has had on the world. So you know what God's answer for that is? A new heavens and a new earth. In other words, the problem is so great, we can't just come in and put a bandage on it. We can't just come in and do a little bit of repair. No, we got to start all over again. You know how great the problem is in the human heart? God's answer likewise is not, you need some advice, you need some No. He says, you know what you need? You need a brand new start. You have to be born again. Remember when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus over in John, the 3rd chapter, and he tells, and Nicodemus, I mean, remember the high council, a guy who's a Pharisee. He's about as good as you get religiously. And Jesus looks at him and says, yeah, well, you got to start all over again. You have to be born again. That, to me, when you look at the solution, tells me how great the problem is, right? And why am I bringing this up? Because that's exactly what Peter is talking about. In fact, in the 1st chapter, kind of sets the stage for where we're going right now. At the end of the 1st chapter, it says, you have been born again. And I realize that just like Nicodemus didn't understand this concept of being born again, sometimes today in the church, I still don't think people understand what we're talking about when we talk about being born again. And very definitely, there's something that God does for us that we cannot do ourselves. And that's the most important part of this new birth. It's a gift that's given to us. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. What we're going to be talking about today is where Peter goes with this. And where Peter goes with this is because you are not the person you used to be. You've been born again. You ought to be a different person. In fact, remember how he described this in the 1st chapter? Seth was talking about this last week. What kind of new person are you? Well, you're not a tourist, right? Tourists just come in, they really don't care about what's going on and local, right? They're just tourists, just there to enjoy them. And you're not one of those immigrants who are trying to assimilate and become just like everybody else so that you blend in and nobody can tell that you're different. No, you're not that extreme. You're not the tourist. You're not the assimilating immigrant. You are a foreigner. Can I pat you on the back? You know what that means? It means you don't speak the language. You don't know the customs. You're different, and everybody knows you're different. In fact, here's the way I want to say it this morning. You are, Christian, annoyingly different. In a good way. Right? Because maybe you don't speak the language very well. Maybe you don't assimilate to some of the customs. Maybe you do things differently. But I tell you what, the difference that you have, other people notice it and they say, you know what, I wish all my neighbors were like that. I wish all the people who worked at the company were like that. They're just different in a good way. That's what it means to be a foreigner, and that's what you and I are supposed to be because we got a brand new life. In this new life, we're not supposed to blend in. We're supposed to be annoyingly different in a good way. Okay, if that's what's been set up in the 1st chapter, and that's what Seth talked a lot about last week, we're going to go into the 2nd chapter where it kind of gives us the background. In other words, what what I think it's going to do a lot of things, but what we're going to focus on in the second chapter is how it is that we can be that annoyingly good foreigner in this land, right? And the first thing that the first few verses in the second chapter is going to draw our attention to is there has to be a change that takes place on the inside first. We're going to deal with the inside first, and then we're going to go to the outside, the way we live. So if you're ready for this, chapter 2, let's get the first 3 verses. The second chapter, therefore, talking about the fact we've got this new life, new birth, we're foreigners, right? Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. Okay, do you get what he is talking about here? He says, listen, we don't have the attitudes, we don't think the way other people think. Like newborn baby, I love this picture. Like a newborn baby longs for milk. You know what we long for? We long for pure spiritual milk. And where do we find that? We find that from God. But to better understand what he's talking about, what we do, he gives us a contrast here, right? This is not what we're like. This is what everybody else is like. But we're not like this, right? Okay, most of these words I think we're familiar with. We don't use the word malice very often outside legal settings, right? What are we talking about with malice? Here's my favorite example of this. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, it might upset you, right? But if you can't stop thinking about them and you're thinking to yourself, that person who's coming, I hope they get in a wreck and just drive off the bridge up. That's malice, right? You've gone beyond being upset. Now you wish ill on somebody, right? Okay, the way this verse looks at me, I'm just telling you my perspective. The way this verse looks at me, I call it the ladder approach. I've heard other people use the ladder approach. And the ladder approach is this. I look like I'm higher up the ladder if I can just make you look like you're lower down the ladder, right? So all I have to do is point out to other people, I bring up bad stuff, slander, I say some bad things about other people, and if they think less of them, then maybe I'll look a little. Guess what? A lot of people fall in that trap. That's the way a lot of people just automatically, their mind goes there. Guess what? We're not allowed to let our minds go there. Like a baby, perfect timing, by the way, perfect timing. Like a baby, would you please give him a bottle, right? Because like a baby wants milk, right? We should long for, what do we long for? Pure spiritual milk. Translated, you know what that means? I'm in the car, somebody cuts me off. My thoughts sometimes want to go one direction, and I can't let that happen. I'm not going to allow myself to think that. I'm going to think what God wants me to think. You already know this. I'm just affirming this. I hope you know this. You are not a victim to your thoughts. Just like you're not a victim to your emotions, you are not a victim to your thoughts. You get to decide what you think. That's why the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, in this life, we're supposed to take every thought captive and make it obedient to the will of Christ, right? I was listening to there's a great interview. I've told some of you about this before, but there's a guy by the name of Lee Warren, Dr. Lee Warren. He's a neurosurgeon, and he's written this great book I've just recently read. But anyway, he was interviewed by Ben Carson, this interview real recently, and he was talking about the fact in neuroscience they've discovered so much stuff, but one of the things he says that people don't realize is every single day you have a new brain. You literally have a new brain. And most people think, well, I'm thinking the same thoughts I thought yesterday. And his point is, the reason you think the same thoughts you thought yesterday is because you choose to. But it's totally up to you where your brain goes. You get to make the choice, right? And the Christian, why? Because we're annoyingly different. We don't let our mind go to the same place other people's minds go. We say, you know what? Stop that, Mark. Don't think about that. Focus on what God wants you to focus on. Okay, let's take this a little bit deeper because that's where he goes in the next couple of verses. His first picture is like the baby that wants nourishment. Well, we've got to nourish our minds, right? I got to give you one more. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, be transformed, right? Remember this verse? What does it mean to be transformed? It means don't be like everybody else. You be different. Be transformed. How are you transformed? You be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You can be a different person if you would just control your thought life, and you do get to make the decision of what your mind's going to focus on, right? So if that's his first illustration here is longing for the things of God and not letting our minds go in the wrong direction, look where he goes next. He changes the metaphor. He changes from the baby to the metaphor of a building. If a building's going to be good, it's got to have a strong, solid foundation. He's still talking about what we choose to focus on in life, right? But look at what he says here. He says, you come to him as the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God, precious to him. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. Now he goes on and develops this idea and talks about this foundation that we've got in Christ. And if you don't build your life on him, you're going to trip over him, because he is the only solid foundation. Now what is it that Peter's trying to communicate to us when he presents this idea of a foundation? I know there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. Here's the way I want you to think about it. Everything you do in life, whether you realize it or not, you do it for a reason. You may not always have that reason, on the tip of your tongue, but there's a reason why you do stuff. Let's take the illustration of a lot of you tomorrow morning are going to go to work. I know that's not a pleasant thought, but nonetheless, you're going to go to work tomorrow, right? Well, if you ask yourself the question, why in the world am I going to work? Again, maybe you don't always do this, but everything you do in life, there's a reason for it, right? If you picture it like a building, and one of the blocks of your life, this is who you are, your life is a building, right? Here's the block that goes to work, right? Okay, ask yourself the question, why do I do that? What you're doing is you're asking, what is the block that comes underneath that block? In other words, what's it based on, right? So if you, hypothetically, why am I going to work? I'm going to work because I have to pay my bills, right? You may have other reasoning, but a lot of people would say, I'm going to work because I have to pay. Well, that's the reason. So that's the block it's based on. Well, let's keep going with this. Why do you want to pay your bills? Well, because I don't want to lose my house. Okay, that might be, right? I want to pay my bills so I don't lose my house. Well, why don't you want to lose your house? Because I don't want to live in the woods, right? I don't want to live in the woods. Well, keep going with that. Why don't you want to live in the woods? Because I love my family and I want to take care of my family, right? You keep on going down and you find reasons underneath reasons, and you're getting closer to your foundation. Here's where I want you to go with me. If you were to ask yourself about your job, about any decision you're making in life, and ask yourself, what's the reason for that? What's the reason for that? You're going to find out what kind of person you really are. And the issue is, if your reasons don't go any further than just your family, well, I'm going to be very careful here. Don't misunderstand me. Doing stuff for your family is a good thing. But if that's your foundation, you're in trouble. Because even your family's going to let you down. And you might think to yourself, no, Mark, you don't know my family. My family would never let me down. Yeah? They're going to die. I mean, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, they are not going to live forever. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? If that is your foundation, it's all about your family, and your family dies, what happens to you? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? If you don't have anything deeper than that, and your family's out of the picture now, what's your life going to look like? You're in trouble. For some people, it's their health, right? They make decisions about, I'm going to the doctor, I'm paying these bills, and I'm doing all this stuff. I'm going to the gym. I eat a diet I don't really enjoy. Why? Because it's all about being healthy. Well, you know what? It's good to be healthy. It really is. But if you don't go any deeper than that, you could do everything right, and you can get in a car wreck on the way out of the parking lot today. Your health can be gone. Man, I am such the bearer of good news today, am I not? Think all these pleasant... No kidding, your health could be gone tomorrow. All I'm saying is, some of these things in and of themselves are good, but if they don't have something deeper, if you don't have something that goes down to a foundation that finally gets to God, I'm sorry, you're in trouble. It's only if you can go all the way back to your relationship with God, and that is only possible because of what Jesus has done for us, giving us a new life. If you don't have that, if you do have that, then even though life can be extremely difficult, I'm telling you, you have got something that's going to make you strong in the midst of the worst things that life can throw at you. But if you don't have that, you're in trouble. And all I think that he is, not all, I think there's more that he's trying to say. But one of the things I think he's trying to get us to think about is it's not just your thought life, it's your will. Why are you doing what you're doing in your life? You need to examine that. You need to ask those questions and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And if it doesn't land on God, it's all going to fall apart someday. There's only one real foundation. Does this make sense? Okay. I hope it does, because I have to go on. That's on the inside. I've got to be concerned about the thoughts I think, take them captive. And I also have to be concerned about my will, why I am doing what I am doing. It needs to get back to because this is what God wants, right? But once I do that, then what does the outside look like? That's the inside. What does the outside look like? Let's skip on down a few more verses here. It says down in verse 9, it says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may..." I'm skipping a lot of material here, but I want to go to the thing that he talks about that we're supposed to do. And what does he say? He's saying here that we as God's people are supposed to do. We are supposed to declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. He develops this picture in a lot of different ways, but the basic idea is this. Listen, you are a new person. You're totally different, the way you think, the will, and everything, because it's all about God in your life. But if you have found this kind of answer in your life, other people need to know. You need to declare the praise. So, can I talk about this for I'm going to talk about this for just a minute. Hang on. Again, this idea of this new life and being annoyingly different foreigners in a good way, I think sometimes it's hard to grasp this. And I think one of the reasons is because there's a lot of terms in the Bible that I'm not so sure we really have. And one of them is praise. I was this freshman in college. This goes way back. I was a freshman in college. I had a 7:15 class. Started at 7:15 in the morning, right? St. Louis, Missouri. I'm sitting there. It's cold. Got my coat on, right? Waiting for class to start. So it's not even 7:15 yet. It's just after 7 o'clock. Other students are coming in. I'm sitting I'm like 3 or 4 desks back from the front. It's a pretty big classroom. There's a bunch of people behind me, but I'm close to the front. There's a guy who sits in front of me. He's just coming into class. As he sits down, other people can you picture this? Everybody's coming into class. They got their coats on and everything. The guy in front of me, I'm not really paying a whole lot of attention to him. I don't know him that well, other than the fact he doesn't go to the kind of church I go to. That's important in this story. Goes to a different kind of church. Okay. He comes in and he's sitting down, and as he's seated in the chair, the desk in front of me, I can tell he's sniffling. You know, it's winter time. He's got the sniffles and stuff like that. Other people are coming in. And then, again, I'm not really paying attention to him at this point, just kind of out of the corner of my eye. I notice that he's doing the like he's going to sneeze, right? And he's polite enough. There's a bunch of people walking down the rows and stuff. He doesn't want to sneeze on anybody. So as his head rears back at the last possible second, he's sitting there ready to sneeze, and he, Achoo! Turns right around and blows snot in my face. Sneezed right on me. Okay, when people sneeze, usually in this case, his eyes are closed, right? After he's done sneezing, his eyes open up, big eyes, right? I'm expecting him to say, "I'm so sorry. Didn't mean to sneeze on you," right? That's not what I heard. This guy turns around. Did you get this picture? This really happened to me. Turns around, hachoo, sneezes in my face, eyes open up, looks right at me, and he says, "Praise Jesus!" And then he turns back around. And I'm like, what? You know, I'm glad you love Jesus and stuff, but what? I'm not so sure that's a praise Jesus moment, right? So I'm just telling you this concept of praise. I've been thinking about this a long time because I'm wondering if maybe the world looks at us that way sometimes. I had an uncle, he's no longer with us. His name's Richard. My aunt's name was Peggy. They both passed on. But Uncle Richard made the point. He said, you know what? If I were enjoying a meal that my wife had prepared and I'm sitting there with the rest of the family, we're all sitting around the dinner table. And because I enjoyed the meal so much, in the middle of the meal, I just put my spoon and my fork down and I reared my head back and I said, praise Peggy! And I picked up my fork again and I started eating. He said, my family's going to think I'm nuts. Right? That would just be the weirdest thing you could do in the middle of the meal. He said, or if I were at work, right, and I was talking to some other people at the watering hole, at the water fountain there, and they're all, everybody's talking, and he said, they're talking about their marriage and everything, and I said, my wife's name's Peggy. Praise Peggy. Oh, yeah, praise Peggy. They're going to think I need medicine or something, If that's all I said about my wife, I'm not really praising my wife. I'm just looking crazy. And he went on to say, I've never forgotten this. I really appreciate his point. He says, I do love my wife, and I do want to praise her. But do you know how I praise her? I tell other people what kind of person she is, some of the sacrifices she's made, some of the things that she's done, and her character. I focus on who she is and what she's done. And I tell that to other people. And when I tell other people that, I am praising my wife. I love that. You know what our job is? We're not just new people on the inside. We're here to declare the praises. How do you and I declare the praises of Him who's given us a new life, called us out of darkness into His wonderful light? I'd like to submit to you. By the way, I don't want to make fun of people. I guess I already did. But there's a time and a place to say praise Jesus, especially if people know what you're talking about. I'm okay with that. What I'm talking about is the world in which we live. I think they need to hear about a hope that we have and an understanding that we've come to and a peace that we've found. I think they need to look at concrete things that have happened to us and that we display. In fact, you know where he goes in this passage? We're going to read just a couple more verses, but if you keep reading the rest of chapter 2 and go on to chapter 3, you know what he talks about next? He talks about being really good citizens. Then he talks about being really good employees, even when your boss is unfair, right? Then he talks about being good husbands and wives. Then he talks about just being good people around other people. I'd call that being a good neighbor. And some people look at, 1st and 2nd Peter, and it's like, well, he's talking about this subject, that subject, that subject. I don't think so. I think what he's doing is saying, here's how you declare the praises of God. You be the best employee that the boss has ever had, right? You be one of the best citizens. You be one of the best neighbors. You be one of the best husbands. You be one of the best wives. You be the kind of person in the neighborhood that everybody says, I wish every neighbor was like that, right? That's how we show the world that we are foreigners here. Annoyingly different, but in a good way. I want to read just a couple more verses and then we'll wrap this up because he gives the rationale behind all of this. He says down on in verses 11 and 12, dear friends, I urge you, again, as foreigners, we're supposed to be different. Foreigners and exiles, abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, those who don't have the same hope, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that He visits us. He says this right before he talks about being citizens and being employees and being family members. He's talking about live normal everyday lives to such a degree that people can tell the difference. Why do we do that? Well, he says down at the end of the chapter, he says, He Himself, talking about Jesus, bore our sins in His body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By His wounds you have been healed. It's talking about a spiritual healing. Jesus has taken care of the biggest issues in our life, the problem of sin, and given us a brand new life. That's why we can do what He asked us to do. 1941, concentration camp in Germany, there was a sergeant from the Polish army who had been captured, was in the concentration camp. In true story, there was a prisoner at that camp who had escaped the night before. When the guards discovered it, they brought all the prisoners out. And they said, we're going to kill 10 prisoners because one person escaped. Because we want you to know that if you get an idea that you're going to try to escape too, you're going to be responsible for 10 more people around you dying. So one of the guards just went down the line and indiscriminately just started 1, 2, 3. When he got down to number 10, the number 10 person that he picked was this sergeant from the Polish army. And when he was chosen, he fell to his knees and started to cry. Everybody around him heard him sobbing. And what he was sobbing about was his wife and kids. He said, I made a commitment that I would survive this camp and live because I've got a family waiting for me. The guard could care less. But there was a man standing behind him that day. His name was Colby. And Colby got the guard's attention and said, I'll take his place. And the guard said, fine. He just wanted 10. They took those 10 people. You know how they killed them? Put them in a room, no food, no water, just starved them to death. Took weeks. The last one to die was Colby. In fact, it didn't look like he was going to die soon enough for the guards, so they injected him with carbolic acid. True story. After the war's over, that guy, the sergeant in the Polish army, he survived. And when the word got out of what happened in the concentration camp, some of the people came and interviewed him and asked him if it was true. He says, it is true. That man took my place. And they asked him, well, how do you feel? And he says, I'll be honest with you. I have been so overwhelmed with guilt that somebody else died in my place. He said, I actually got to the point I contemplated suicide. I couldn't take it. But he said, when I got so close to taking my own life, it hit me. How could I take a life that somebody else laid down their life so I could live? That would be the most insulting thing I could do to this guy who laid down his life, right? So he said, I finally made the commitment that since he took my place, the best way I could pay him back is to live life to the fullest. There's somebody who died for you so that you could be the best citizen, the best neighbor, the best employee. Whether the boss is watching or not, whether they deserve it or not, you're going to be the best employee, the best citizen, the best neighbor, the best husband, the best friend that people have ever seen. Annoyingly good. What gives here? I'm living a life for somebody who laid down their life for me so that I could have a brand new, albeit strange and foreigner, life that I wish you had too, right? It's exactly what we're going to focus on now as we come to the table to remember what Jesus did for us and remind us of what kind of people we're supposed to be, right? Would you bow and pray? When you're ready, would you come to one of the tables?